Just going to be reading some little things here and there. Anyway, right. Never seen these before, so okay. Locked. I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder when I was 5. I've always struggled to interact with people because of this disorder, spending large amounts of time attempting to fix imperfections around me. I would lash out harshly at people around me if they touched me or my things, and I became socially isolated. My father died when I was 7, and so my mother did her very best to raise me by herself despite my condition. She was the one person who I felt that I could talk to about it, and she would always be very respectful of everything I did to appease my compulsions. We moved farther out into the country when I was 12, which I loved as it allowed me to distance myself from others. My mother passed away from breast cancer 3 years ago when I was finishing my online computer science courses. Since then, I managed to live on my own despite my condition. I live alone in the house out in the country and support myself through online programming contracts. I only go out when absolutely necessary to do things such as purchase groceries and medication, and thus I have almost no relationships with anyone else. I have many different compulsions due to my severe OCD. I always have to perfectly align my cutlery and plates in the kitchen drawers, ensure that all surfaces are spotless, and many other things. The compulsion that is most important in the events that prompted me to post this is my compulsion to lock the doors leading into my home. Every night, I go around my entire house precisely 7 times. I have a front door, back door, and a door that leads out into my garage. They all have these large glass panes in the center, which allows me to look outside when I lock them. My method for checking the doors is to first look at the lock, ensuring that it is in the correct position, and then trying to open the door 3 times, pressing down the handle to make sure that it doesn't budge. After I check each of them in this manner 7 times, I can finally be sure that every entrance is safely locked and that nobody can access my home from outside. As I said earlier, I live in the middle of the country, with the closest house to me being about half a mile away down a dirt road. The only thing I had been warned about in the area was the coyotes and other such animals that lived in the surrounding woods. There had never been a break in near me to my knowledge, and so I thought that it was one of the safest places to live, and that my constant checking of the locks was just to appease my always uneasy mind. However, 2 weeks ago, I noticed something outside my door that put me on edge. When I went to lock my back door, a shadow seemed to shift along the tree line leading into the forest on my property. It looked large and stood taller than the coyotes that I've seen around my house from time to time. I paused at my door, staring through the glass at the spot where I had seen the shape. After 5 minutes, I decided that it must have been a trick of the light and that I had just been worrying about nothing. That being said, I performed my 7-check routine twice that night to calm my nerves. I went out the next morning to check the spot in the woods where I had seen the shadow. I knew that I would need to spend an hour cleaning the dirt off my shoes, but I was curious enough to make it worth it. When I reached the spot and I witnessed the dark shape, I saw that there was nothing there that should have been able to cause such a trick of the light. There were only a few sparse trees. There was no undergrowth that could have shifted due to the gentle breeze of the night before. More concerned then I had been before I checked. I made my way slowly back to the house, trying not to dirty my clothes to lessen the cleanup I would have to do. I went about my usual routine for the rest of the day, spending a few hours working on a program for an upcoming contract deadline and ensuring that my house was in order. I approached my nightly locking ritual with trepidation, but was more determined than ever to ensure that everything was locked tightly for the night. on my 6th round of checking the locks. I froze when I reached the front door. There was a person, maybe about 6 feet tall, standing 30 to 40 feet away from the steps leading up to the door. They maintained still and unmoving for what seemed like half an hour as we stared at each other. I eventually broke from my trance and began to move towards my living room, where my closest landline phone was. One of the problems I had with living out in the country is that I had no cell phone service at all. My only communication to the outside world was through my wired phone and internet coming from the dilapidated telephone pole at the end of the road. When I reached my phone, I quickly dialed emergency services and reached an operator after several rings. 911, what is your emergency? I was a little slow to respond. I hadn't spoken to another person in over a month. Hello? Somebody's standing in my front lawn. They are just standing there. They have been there for at least 30 minutes and I don't know what to do. Stay calm, sir. We will dispatch an officer to your location shortly. The 20 minutes that it took the police officers to arrive at my house felt like days. During this time, I continued to stare at the person outside my door. As I heard the police sirens approaching, I saw the person turn and sprint. Except that they ran faster and more disjointedly than any human I had ever seen before. They disappeared into the woods within seconds, and all I could manage to do was stand there, confused and terrified. Within a minute, 2 uniformed police officers were knocking at my door. I opened it immediately and told them what had happened. They went to search the area of the woods in which I had seen the person, if it could even be considered human, disappear into. After about an hour and a half of searching, they returned with no evidence that there had been anyone there at all. The officers told me that because the person hadn't done anything but trespass and hadn't threatened me in any way, there was nothing more that they could do. They told me to call back immediately if I saw the person again, and to make sure that I locked my doors securely at night, and then drove off. Needless to say, there was no need for them to tell me to keep my doors locked at night. I performed my locking routine over and over until I became exhausted, and I passed out on the couch. When I woke up the next morning, I decided that I needed to do something to help protect myself. I got myself up and out of the door and made the 20-minute drive into town. The state I live in has very loose gun laws, so I was able to purchase a shotgun and several boxes of ammunition that same day. Returning home, I watched a video on how to use the firearm safely and used a couple of trees for target practice. I placed the weapon and ammo beside my bed so that I would be able to access it quickly in case of an emergency. In spite of my preparations, I did not see the person at all during my nightly locking routine the following week. After several days, I began to assume that they had been scared off by the police and began to relax a little. I moved the shotgun from directly next to my bed to a shelf in the closet and managed to finish my program before the contract deadline. However, 3 nights ago, everything changed. I had just finished my locking routine for the night when I saw the person again. They were standing outside my backyard, about the same distance from the house as the night I had seen them through my front door. I was stunned and horrified. I had hoped that this was all over after I had stopped seeing them regularly. I quickly ran to the landline that I had had in my kitchen to call the police, and when I picked up the receiver, I heard a steady tone. Disconnected. I ran around to all of the other phones in my house and heard all of them emitting the same grim tone. And then I tried to use my mobile phone to internet call the police, but my router was malfunctioning. Going to one of the windows at the front of my house, I realized that the line providing my only communication to the outside world had been slashed. I was completely alone. I slowly walked to look through my backyard window and let out a short yell of shock and horror. Standing, with its hands against the window, was the thing that had been standing in my backyard. If there had been any doubt before, I was sure by then that it was not a person. Its wide eyes were the size of tennis balls, with a hole where its nose should have been. Teeth lined its wide, smiling mouth, which, under other circumstances, could have been considered comically large. Its hands had only 3 long fingers each, and its legs seemed to have 3 uneven knees. Looking back on it later, I realized that this must have been why it had moved in such an odd way when I had seen it run into the woods. I shook involuntarily at the sight of the creature. It was by far the most terrifying thing I had ever seen, and while I am not proud of it, I lost control of my bladder. Panicking, I sprinted up the stairs to get to my shotgun as fast as possible. I slammed my bedroom door shut, locked it, and fumbled to load the shelves. I waited in that room for what must have been hours before I realized something. That my car was in the shut garage, and I could get to it via the connecting door, which I made sure to lock so tightly every night. Moving down the stairs as quietly as possible, so that the creature wouldn't realize my intentions, I moved towards the entrance to the garage. When I saw the door, I caught a glimpse of something that made me start to cry with frustration and fear. The thing's horrendous face and appendages pressed against the glass. I remember shutting the garage door. I knew I had. Hadn't I? Maybe I had overlooked it the 7 times I'd checked that door, but perhaps the creature had managed to force its way in. However, debating this would not change anything. I was trapped, and the beast was there, grinning at me from my only escape route. I backed up the stairs again and locked myself in my bedroom once more. I spent the rest of the night pointing my shotgun at that door, listening intently for any signs of forced entry. I waited several hours after the sun had come up before venturing back downstairs. When I finally did, it was still there. I cautiously went to look out of my front door to see if there was any way I could make it to my car. And it was there. At the front door. When I peered out of the back door, it was there too. No matter what I did, or how quickly I ran around my house, it was always faster and always seemed to know where I would be. It had been 3 days and nights since I first met with its cold gaze and sickening grin. I can't look out of my door or window without seeing its face staring back at me. The last time I went out for food was over a week ago, and so I am beginning to run low on supplies. The shotgun that I bought to defend myself is starting to look incredibly inviting, and I'm afraid that I won't be able to stand this much longer. Having been cut off from the outside world, I plan to leave this handwritten note where someone is sure to discover it. If worst comes to worst, at least word of what had happened to me out here will get out. Crazy as it might seem, I had to laugh to myself just now, as I finally realized the irony of my situation. For a long time now, I had the composure to make sure that I am securely locked in for the night. I've never before been so sure, as I am now, that I am truly locked in. Charles Bonnet syndrome. I suffer from a condition called Charles Bonnet syndrome, or visual release hallucinations if you want to get more technical. It's a condition that's far more common than you might realize. It's estimated that as many as half of people with gradual loss of vision will experience one or more bouts over their lifetime. Yet, I am willing to bet that most of you have never heard of it. The reason for that is because most sufferers are scared to tell anybody what we experience. I know I was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Andrew, and I am 26. 2 years ago, I woke up with an awful blurred vision, every single edge and detail clouded as if somebody had smeared Vaseline on a camera lens. It never got better. I was scared then, and got over to Dr. Harper's surgery as fast as possible, suddenly needing to take a cab rather than climb in the car I'd driven without incident ever since I'd bought it 3 years prior. The doctor did some tests, asked me some questions. Have you been much thirstier lately? How often do you urinate? How would you describe your tiredness levels? And then gave me the diagnosis that changed my life forever. Diabetes. Type 1. He explained that I would need to take insulin shots with every meal, that eating the wrong foods without monitoring my blood sugar would see me drop into a coma, or worse. Then he got to my eyes. Andrew, your diabetes has resulted in maculopathy. Do you know what that is? I shook my head dumbly, already reeling with the shock of my diagnosis, and Dr. Harper went on. It's when the diabetes affects the blood vessels at the back of your eye, blocking them and causing them to leak into the macula, the center part of your retina that helps you perceive color and fine detail. When these blood vessels leak into the macula, it can cause significant damage. With a lump in my throat, I asked, "Okay, so how do we make this better?" I couldn't see Harper's face properly when he spoke, but his tone of voice was enough to tell me what I'd been dreading. "I'm sorry, Andrew," he replied gravely. "Perhaps if we'd caught this a little sooner, we might have had some treatment options available to us, but I'm afraid the damage has been pretty extensive. We can take steps to arrest the development of the condition, but I'm afraid it's irreversible." I felt as if my world had come crashing down around me. I was just 24, still at my physical peak. I was active, playing basketball and cycling a couple of times a week. And now my health, my body, and my sight had been taken from me. The first 6 months were tough. I broke up with my girlfriend, a sweet girl called Holly, who tried to make it work but couldn't because I was so damn angry all the time. I lost my job because if there was one thing an architect needs, it is eyes. I even fell out with a lot of my friends, being excuses not to meet with them until they stopped asking. In truth, it was jealousy on my part. Envy that they got to keep on living while everything I'd ever hoped for had been snatched away. I became a recluse, never leaving my apartment, barely bothering to wash, shave, or get dressed each day. I was so sure that my life was over. I stopped even trying to live it. I was an asshole. It took me a long time to realize this, but in the end, it was the nurse assigned to visit me at home, a tall, no-nonsense experienced woman called Lois, who brought this to my attention. "You're an asshole," she said. "What?" I gasped, shocked at her language. "So you've got diabetes. Do you know how many people do?" she asked. Then, before waiting for my answer, she continued, "Do you think they all hide in their apartments, refusing to get on with their lives? Losing your vision is a terrible thing, and you do have my sympathy. But, Andrew, it's no excuse to give up." "But you don't," I argued, trying to defend myself, but she hadn't finished. "Understand?" she growled. "One of the bravest men I know was paralyzed from the neck down when he was just a child, and he hasn't given up. You can do so much more with your life, and you have people that want to help you do that, but you can't even be bothered to shave that ugly fucking beard off. Stop being a crybaby and make a fucking difference." Of course, it didn't happen overnight, and I argued with her. I was furious at her blunt insensitivity, and I told her to leave. I said I'd tell her superiors, but she laughed and told me I wouldn't. "You won't, because you're a smart guy and you've got too much pride for that," she said. "I'll see you next week." That night, I shaved. I opened my curtains and actually looked around. Things were blurry, and I finally really looked. I could see the things scattered around my home. The mess I'd let it become. When Lois came back the following week, the place was tidy. I was clean-shaven, dressed. I'd even attempted to comb my hair. She didn't say anything about it, didn't mention the argument of the week before, but she took me out for coffee down the street. She guided me along the sidewalk to the coffee shop, talking to me, reassuring me. It was daunting, even though it was less than a block away, but I felt so proud when I got there. We talked, me and Lois. I think I even laughed. Afterwards, she walked me home. Then, when she helped me back inside, she said, "It's nice to meet you, at last, Andrew." That day was the beginning of my new life. I moved to a new apartment, a ground floor place, and joined a group of other young people with visual impairments. I made friends. I got out every day, even when it was just a short walk. But I made a point of seeing what I could of the world. I bought what I could, but the Sawyers, the old couple that ran the local store, would bring my groceries by once a week. Clark's a gruff old coot, so he refuses to cuddle me, and he's told me that he respects me for being like I am, for maintaining my independence, for not giving up. From a guy like him, that's one of the sweetest things I've ever heard. Things were going so well. And then, 1 year ago, it started. I walked into my living room, a mug of coffee in my hand, and saw a Victorian funeral carriage stood right there on my rug, complete with 2 huge, proud horses in full livery, adorned with long black plumes in their bridles. They stood perfectly still, while the driver, a small bearded man in period costume and a top hat, fidgeted with the reins and peered at me expectantly. Bizarrely, they were far clearer than the usual blurry shapes that I could see. I damn near pissed my pants. I dropped the cup, spilling scalding hot coffee over my bare feet, jumping backwards with a cry of pain and alarm. When I returned my attention to the horses and carriage back in the room, they were gone. At that moment, I wondered if I was going mad. Apparently most of us do, which is understandable. How would you feel if you'd seen that exact same sight in your home? Unless you're Jack the Ripper, I imagine that many of you do not have a coach and horses just lying around. I certainly didn't. Eventually, after much quiet swearing to myself, and more than a little self-delusion, I managed to convince myself that I had not seen what I thought I had. That was merely a very vivid daydream. This seemed to work, and I got on with living, even if I entered the same room a little more cautiously in the days that followed. Finally, I forgot about it. 2 weeks later, I saw a giant, floating, swirling orange ball in my bathroom. I damn near pissed myself again. I stood staring at it, this bizarre, rotating, levitating globe that was just a little larger than a beach ball hanging in the mid-air over my tub. Open-mouthed for a full 10 seconds before finally screwing my eyelids tightly closed and whispering to myself, "That isn't there, that isn't there." After 5 seconds, I opened my eyes again. It wasn't there. Have you ever had cause to doubt your own sanity? To wonder whether what you perceive is truly there, or if your mind has betrayed you? Honestly, compared to the loss of my vision, the prospect of losing my wits was much more terrifying. I'd fought against adversity and took pride in the fact that I am not just a survivor, but somebody who is living his own life. How could I do that if I was insane? I barely slept that night, and I maintained jumpy for days afterwards. Any sign of movement or any unfamiliar shape would set my pulse racing, would cause me to doubt whether it was truly there. It was the toughest time I'd ever been through, worse even than that time after I was diagnosed with diabetes. At least when Dr. Harper had told me about the diabetes, I had a definitive prognosis. I was given facts by a medical professional. My affliction was physical. It had a name, and most important, it had a treatment plan. This was something else. My own mind had turned against me. My senses and perception of reality had become twisted and unreliable. It's only when you're in that position that you realize just how terrifying it is. Your senses and the way in which your brain interprets them are your only true defenses against danger. You perceive danger and you avoid it, preventing your body from becoming harmed. But what happens when you can't trust your perception to alert you to dangers that are truly there? Lois picked up the problem first, noticing my skittish manner. She asked what was wrong, if I needed to talk about anything, but I told her no. I was fine, but I hadn't been sleeping well. That last part was true. I hadn't been able to sleep a wink. Just the very thought of being institutionalized, spending the rest of my days a sedated, blue pyjamas-clad zombie in the white room with only the echoing cries of my fellow inmates for company, terrified me beyond measure. But what was the alternative? Live life as a risk to myself and others? Ultimately, I chose to ignore it. I reasoned that if I was able to function around other people without them realizing what was going on, that was good enough. A full month passed before the next incident, and I really did think that maybe I'd put this whole mess behind me. With every passing day, my confidence had grown, so that Wednesday morning, I stepped out onto the sunny street feeling pretty carefree. Each Wednesday, I treat myself to a latte down at Joe's, the same coffee shop that I'd visited with Lois. It was a custom that gave me a great deal of pleasure, one that had seen me forge friendships with other regulars as well as the staff, including Joe himself. As I made my way down the street, white stick in hand, I glanced about me, taking in the colours and the shapes of the world around me. I enjoyed the feel of the sun on my face and the sounds of the birds singing. It was a good day. Then I saw them. A party of pilgrims, 6 of them, all dressed in settler-era attire, sitting cross-legged on the asphalt. They didn't look at me. Instead, they were engaged in a heated yet strangely silent conversation. I froze, staring at them. Still they argued, gesticulating furiously at one another. However, I couldn't hear their angry voices, despite the fact that, judging by their temperament, they must be screaming at one another. Paralyzed by shock, the white stick fell from my numb fingers, clattering onto the sidewalk. I turned to leave, desperate to flee from the haunting sight of the colonists in the road, but I was so panicked, in such a hurry, that I stepped on my cane. It rolled underfoot, and before I knew it, I pitched over, tumbling to the hard ground below. I didn't quite break my fall in time, banging my cheek hard on the floor and skinning my palms. I heard a cry from a passerby, a friendly, concerned woman who rushed to my side. She knelt beside me, helping me up, applying a Kleenex to my throbbing cheek, which she informed me was now bleeding. I tried to tell her that I was okay, and there was nothing to worry about, but this good Samaritan insisted on driving me to Dr. Harper's office to get my injuries looked at. Now I think back to it, I'm pretty sure that she knew my obvious distress was nothing to do with the fall. At the time I was embarrassed and angry, but now I realize I owe her a debt of gratitude. Without her intervention, I don't know how much longer this would have gone on before I cracked up and ended up in an asylum after breaking down through sheer stress. Andrew, why don't you tell me what happened? Dr. Harper asked, gently dabbing at my cheek with disinfectant. I explained that I just lost my balance and that no harm was done, but I think he saw through my feeble protestations to my underlying agitation. He didn't press or force the matter. He simply asked what might have caused my clumsiness. Then he asked how I'd been, as of late. When I'd finished mumbling my way through the most non-committal answer I could muster, he placed a gentle, reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Andrew," he repeated gently, "why don't you tell me what happened?" I burst into tears. I told him how scared I was, how I'd fought so hard for my independence, and now I knew it would be taken from me. He listened patiently, and then asked me to tell me why I had ever thought that. I paused then, took a deep breath and thought about it. This was the point of no return. But really, what other option did I have? So with tears running down my cheeks, I told Dr. Harper everything. I told him about the horse and the carriage, the orange globe and the pilgrims. I told him how I'd been living each day in fear, how I was terrified that I was losing my mind. Dr. Harper thought for a while, and when he said, "Andrew, I don't think you were losing your mind." The sense of relief at that moment was so powerful, it overwhelmed me, rendering me speechless. "You say that even though you've seen these things, you've never heard any noise of them? Have you detected any odors or experienced any other physical sensations, such as touching them?" I shook my head no, and he patted my shoulder once again. "Andrew, have you heard of Bonnet syndrome?" he asked. Who?" I asked, confused by a sudden unexpected turn of conversation. "Okay, let me explain," Dr. Harper said kindly. Charles Bonnet was a Swiss naturalist who was born in the 1700s. He discovered a curious condition in his elderly grandfather, who was nearly completely blind due to cataracts. The old man regularly experienced visual hallucinations, including random patterns and even people and places. Sound familiar? "Yes," I replied, still confused. Am I suffering from dementia?" No, Andrew, not at all," Dr. Harper reassured me. "Do you know how perception works? In layman's terms, your eyes take in light via the iris and pupil, which is then processed via the retina and translated into electrical signals which are decoded by the brain, which simply organizes these signals into a recognizable image. With me so far?" I nodded, finally starting to understand. When the retina becomes damaged, such as those that have undergone macular degeneration, those signals become warped and jumbled. Dr. Harper went on. The brain still receives them, so it does its job, translating these distorted signals into an image. It kind of fills in the gaps for you. Sometimes it fills these gaps with colors, patterns, creatures, and places that aren't present. And this is called Charles Bonnet syndrome. I nearly wept with relief. "So, I'm not mad?" I cried. "Not at all," the doctor replied. "This is an entirely physical condition. Your mind is in full working order. If you were suffering from any form of mental illness, your delusions wouldn't be limited to just one sense. You'd hear these interlopers, smell them, even feel them. This is a condition solely related to your eyes, not your brain." As I left Dr. Harper's office, I felt as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Sure, my vision has still an issue, but now I knew it was only a problem with my eyes, not my mind. I knew I could handle the situation. I was ready to face the world again. Since then, I've seen plenty of weird visions. I saw a huge waterfall in the park, complete with a hazy mist and the butterflies flitting about it. I saw a Native American warrior, complete with a huge feather headdress, sitting at a stool at the counter in the coffee shop. I saw an intricate and quite impossible structure of scaffolding crisscrossing the entire front of my apartment block. Hell, on the 4th of July last year, I even saw a great swooping green dragon in the sky, twisting, cavorting through the air overhead. All looked utterly and completely real. Yet, now I knew that they were simply tricks of the eye. They were no longer disturbing. In fact, I actually came to quite enjoy them, even looking at them as unique and entertaining little shows or works of art that existed purely for my pleasure and nobody else's. I came to welcome them. Then, a month ago, I saw her. It was night time. It is always night time when I see her, and I was getting ready for bed. I walked into the kitchen to get myself a glass of water, and actually cried out in alarm when I spotted the figure in the corner. She was tall, by far the tallest woman I'd ever seen, and even though she stood hunched, she still had at least 6 inches on me. I was used to seeing characters in dated and bizarre dress, but this was different somehow. It didn't seem like an outfit from any one time. Instead, a bizarre mishmash of items. She wore a tuxedo jacket, figure-hugging in black, tailored to the female body shape, over a dirty old ruffled dress shirt. To complete the ensemble, she wore a bright red bow tie. On her hands, which she held out to either side as if shrugging, or maybe feeling for the rain, she wore dirty white gloves. Her fingers were disproportionately long, almost spidery, and occasionally they twitched, as if she longed to grip and squeeze something in them. On her lower half, she wore shorts the same crimson as a bow tie, over opaque black nylons. Her legs were long, lithe, attractive, if truth be told, the legs of a dancer. She also wore red heels, the same hue as the shorts and bow tie, but they sparkled and shimmered, bringing to mind Judy Garland's ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz. As strange as this ensemble was, I couldn't tear my eyes from her face. Most of it was obscured by a jaunty bowler hat, tipped and tilted to hide her eyes and nose. But beneath the brim of her hat, I could see the deathly pale skin of her face, and a grin that sent shivers down my spine. It was wide, too wide, with entirely too many teeth. A smile is meant to be an expression of warmth. It's meant to feel welcoming and benevolent. But the look on this woman's face oozed malice. It felt much like a sort of glee I'd expect from a snake as corners a rat. However, the thing that startled me most was that she had a third arm sprouting from her back, curled up and over her head like a scorpion's tail. It was longer than any arm should be, and the hand had only 3 fingers, like a claw. It was pointed straight at me as I swore in dismay and stumbled sideways. It seemed to track my movement. I stood staring at the creepy figure for a few seconds, trying to get my head around the situation. She just stood there, in the corner, grinning back. Finally, I realized that this was just another of my hallucinations, and breathed an audible sigh of relief. One of the tricks I'd picked up over the months of suffering from Charles Bonnet syndrome is to break the line of vision toward whichever stimulus is causing my brain to interpret the images into hallucination. Think of it like restarting a faulty computer, how refreshing the system debugs it. To this end, I close my eyes and count to 5. Then, when I reopen them, the hallucination is gone. So, as I stared at the horrifying, malformed figure in my kitchen, I knew that I had to make the image go away, and to do so, I simply had to close my eyes. I'll be honest here. When I counted to 5, I hesitated a little before opening my eyes. If I'd opened my eyes, and she'd still stood there, smiling that wicked smile at me, I think I might have had a heart attack. She wasn't, and I breathed another long sigh of relief, fetched my glass of water, and went back to bed. The tall woman haunted my thoughts in the day after I saw her. She was different from the other visions I had had. Somehow, she felt more real. It was this agitation that my buddy Jason picked me up when we met for lunch the following Friday. Jason was one of those same friends I tried to drive away shortly after I lost my vision, yet he refused to give up on me, continuing to get in touch week after week. Good friends are hard to come by, but great friends, the ones who will be by your side for life, are even rarer. Jason, God bless his kind heart, is one of the latter. "You've got to tell me what's going on," he said as we sat down over pizza. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to brush it off. "You're so distracted, it's like you're looking for something here all the time. You've eaten, like, 1 slice of pizza in the time it's taken me to eat 4. So, I repeat, you've got to tell me what's going on," Jason said, waving a slice of pizza around for emphasis. "It's nothing," I replied, feeling a little stupid. "I just had a hallucination a couple of nights ago that really got to me." "I thought you were cool with those now," he asked it, putting the pizza slice down. "Yeah, I am. I mean, I was, but this was different," I replied, resigned to talking about it. She scared me. "She?" Jason asked, his interest clearly piqued. "Tell me about it." So I did. I described the tall woman and how she'd appeared to me. I explained that unlike any of my other hallucinations, she felt more real, and she was the first to feature such a weird and unsettling mutation. Sure, I'd seen smaller versions of people in the past, a phenomenon referred to as Lilliputian by medical professionals, but the extra appendage and impossibly distorted face was something I'd yet to encounter thus far. I think it was that, combined with the unnerving expectant stance, that had disturbed me the most. "So," Jason said after I'd finished, "you say she had great legs?" "Shut up, you asshole," I laughed, throwing my napkin at him. "No, seriously, I get it, man," Jason replied, passing the napkin back to me. "If I walked into a room and a giant mutant was waiting for me, I'd scare the shit out of me." "But you know what caused you to see this? It's like the coachman in that waterfall you saw. A condition that you know you have, and it's one that you know how to deal with, yeah?" I know, I replied. "Thanks, you're right." I did feel better too, so I smiled at him, took a big bite of my pizza and changed the subject, asking about his Psycho X, a conversation he was all too happy to dive into. The next time I saw the tall woman, just under a week later, I was brushing my teeth. I was stood at the wash basin, brushing away, when I spotted the figure in the mirror. She was out in the dark hallway, peeking around the door behind me. That same sinister grin I'd seen before, stretched her narrow face into a distorted grimace, the dirty bowler hat that pushed down over her eyes once again. Each of those 3 long, spidery hands gripped the doorframe. As crazy as this sounds, it felt like she was trying to avoid being spotted. I cried out, spitting toothpaste foam all over the mirror, my toothbrush clattering into the basin. I spun around, my heart thumping in my chest, my breathing ragged in my throat. She wasn't there. Of course, she wasn't. The doorway was empty. I tiptoed forward, hesitantly, trying to look around the doorframe into the hallway without actually sticking my neck out into its shadowy confines. The seconds ticked by as I drew closer and closer. I couldn't see anything, so, finally, with a whisper of self-affirmation, I stepped out of the bathroom. The hallway was empty, as was the rest of my apartment. I was shaken again. This was the first time I'd seen a hallucination in a reflection, and I wasn't even sure that I'd actually seen it. Now, as I sit here, writing this, knowing what would follow, I think I thought like that to try to protect myself, to shield myself from the truth. I was an idiot. A full fortnight passed without incidents. Sure, I saw a flash of colour one day, a dancing yellow lightning bolt that zigzagged back and forth on the street outside my apartment, but that was exactly the sort of thing I'd come to expect from my condition. It was exciting, otherworldly, but it wasn't scary. Not like she was. In retrospect, that fortnight was blissful. It was a reminder of what life could be like, the existence that I'd carved out for myself since my diagnosis. Life was good. The night that changed the way I viewed the tall woman, last night, I'd been out and had a couple of drinks. I'd met the other guys with visual impairments for dinner, and we'd ended up at a bar afterwards. I wasn't hammered, but we got through plenty of beer between us, and by the time I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt decidedly lightheaded. It took me a while to make it home, laughing and talking to a couple of other guys from our group as we strode along. It had been a great evening. It's probably the last truly good one I'll ever have. I bid the other guys good night, and, fumbling with my key, I let myself in. With swaying steps, I strode into my hallway, slamming the door a little too loudly behind me. I took off my jacket, hung it on the hook by the door, and then hit the light switch. She was waiting at the end of the hallway. All 3 hands held aloft into claws, reaching for me. That same maddening, malevolent grin on her pale face. I swore again, louder than ever, actually jumping back a step, recoiling from the impossibly tall and terrifying figure lying in wait in my own house. The tall woman didn't move. She just stood there, standing, staring, and smiling at me. I stared back, but I sure as hell didn't smile. Jesus Christ, I muttered under my breath. You know how you can feel a little paranoid after a few beers? That feeling of non-specific post-alcohol dread? Imagine that combined with a giant grinning mutant woman suddenly appearing in your house. Suffice to say, it was very, very, very uncool. I don't need this, I sighed, then closed my eyes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When I opened my eyes, her face was just a foot from my own, grinning wider than ever. She dashed the length of the hallway, and was now stood so close that her long, grasping arms were either side of me, her fingers twitching and clawing at the air around my face. I could see her chest heaving as if she were actually laughing silently at my attempts to dismiss her. As if the thought that I could ever be free of her was amusing. I screamed, a full-bodied shriek of terror, and actually dropped to my knees, covering my hand and head as if to fend off an unexpected blow. It never came. Finally, I lowered my hands, gasping for breath, shaking. The hallway was empty. The tall woman nowhere to be seen. I stayed there, on my knees, for a moment, gasping for breath. Then I was on my feet, and I turned and ran out of the apartment, out of the building, and into the street. I stood there, shivering, beyond terrified, without a clue as to what to do next. Finally, I pulled my phone from my pocket and I made a phone call. "Hey, Andy, what's up?" Jason asked. "Jason, I need you to come here," I said, sobbing. Jason didn't need to ask why. Didn't complain. Instead, he simply replied, "I'm on my way." Less than 20 minutes later, his car pulled up outside and he dashed over to the steps outside my building where I was sitting, shivering. He threw his jacket around my shoulders and asked what had happened, his voice filled with concern. She's in there," I stammered. The tall woman, she's back." Okay, he said, gently helping me to my feet. "Come on, man, let's go. Let's go in there and check it out." I wish I could say that I was brave when we went inside, but I'd be lying. I cowered behind Jason, one hand on his shoulder, as we made our way through my home. Of course, we didn't find a thing. We were talking a giant mutant woman in a poky little one-bed apartment. Where the hell was she going to hide? Finally, after we checked every single room twice, I had to admit that she was gone. "I'm so sorry," I apologized, feeling genuinely stupid. "I got scared and... I'm sorry, man." "Forget about it," Jason said. "So, I'm here now. Where do you keep your booze?" Half a bottle of bourbon later, we're both feeling pretty talkative. She's kind of different, I tried to explain. I get it, he said. "It's like you saw something bad and you feel bad and that's bad." He didn't get it. "No, she's different, I explained. "I never had a great repeat hallucination before. And they've never been scary, She's not like the others." "Dude," Jason said, taking another sip of bourbon. "You've got, Charlie Boney syndrome, and that makes you see shit, so..." He waved his hands in the air like a magician who just performed a trick. I know, I replied. "No, listen, Andy," he said. You know, it makes you see shit. It's just your eyes, yeah? You didn't hear anything. You didn't feel anything. This is how that stuff goes. It's your eyes. And, you know, I know it's crazy, man, but you've been through, like, hell and high water in your life so far. You're tough. One of the toughest, bravest guys I know. And you can handle some creepy hallucination, bitch. I laughed. I couldn't help it. She is a very creepy hallucination bitch, though. He laughed too, and we both took a drink. You know, that could help, he said finally, his voice thoughtful. What? Drinking? I asked. No, well, yeah, it does. He giggled. I mean, like, demystifying her? You know, you should give her a name. Something stupid so she's not scary. I've got to say that as much as I like creepy hallucination bitch, that's a bit of a mouthful. I laughed. Yeah, I get that, he replied. Suddenly, something he'd said came back to me. How about Helen? I suggested. Helen Highwater? Awesome, he said, then raised his glass. Here's to Helen, buddy. Helen, I smiled, and drained my glass. Jason spent the night on my sofa, mainly because he'd had too much to drink to even think about getting behind the wheel of a vehicle. But honestly, I think the reason he drank so much was so he'd have an excuse to stay and keep an eye on me. I'm glad he did. Knowing that he was there made me feel safer, and I was able to get some sleep. It gave me a sense of security to know that if the strange vision I'd just christened Helen was to appear again, I'd be able to call on him for support. This morning, we both needed support. It feels like a mule kicked me in the head, he groaned when I made my way into the living room. Yep, I replied, my own head thumping. Joe's, he replied firmly, and staggered to his feet. As we drank strong black coffee and ate muffins, we didn't talk much. Finally, Jason broke the silence. So, you feel cool now? He asked, his mouth still full of blueberry muffin. I nodded. Yeah, I think so. I'm still freaked out about you know who? He asked. Helen? I replied with a smile. No, I really don't think I am. I reckon I can handle some creepy hallucination, bitch. Good, he laughed, giving me a hearty pat on the back. That's cool. I bet you can. Now as I sit here, cowering in my bathroom, too scared to go out to my apartment, I know we were both wrong. About everything. Remember how earlier I told you that the thought of being institutionalized, that the very idea of losing my grasp on reality was the most terrifying thing I could imagine? Now I'd welcome that, because the alternative is far, far worse. After breakfast, I said goodbye to Jason, and he climbed into his car and drove away. The day passed without incident, and when Lois dropped by this afternoon, she even commented on how upbeat I seemed. You got a lady in your life? She asked, casually. I laughed at that, wondering what she'd think if she knew the truth. I chuckled. Yeah, something like that. Good for you. She sniffed. You make sure you treat her right. It tickled me even more, and I had to bite my lip. Sure, I replied. I'll do my best. Tonight, Still a little wiped from the exertions of the previous evening, I decided to turn in early. I brushed my teeth, washed my hands and face, and got changed. Finally, I fetched a glass of water and walked into my bedroom. I climbed into bed and instantly felt so relaxed. Within mere seconds, I was ready for sleep. A sudden overwhelming drowsiness that comes when you've spent a whole day keeping sleep at bay. I decided that resistance was futile and sat up to switch off the light. I nearly didn't see her, but as I reached for the switch, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. My heart leaped into my throat as I turned to the foot of my bed. The tall woman was crouching there, her grinning face staring at me from just beyond my feet. So many teeth. Her long, slender fingers spread out over my blankets, twitching slightly as she gripped the end of the bed. Slowly, excruciatingly so, a third misshapen arm came into view over her shoulder, joining her other hands on my bedding. I froze, utterly petrified. I was at a crossroads here, arriving at the pivotal moment that had been coming for some time. But this time, I'd had enough. "You don't scare me anymore," I said, my voice filled with defiance and anger. "I'm not letting you do this to me." I reached across to the light switch. "Good night, Helen," I said triumphantly, then flicked it, plunging the room into darkness. I laid there, a sense of tremendous pride surging through me, and I grinned to myself in my warm, comfortable bed, overjoyed at the emotional victory of overcoming my own fear. And then it happened. The thing that led me here. Something that turned my blood to ice water and my bowels to jelly. "Good night, Andrew," her rasping voice hissed from the darkness. Julia Laguerre. A few years ago, I was spending some time with friends exploring old, supposedly haunted places. We were at the Edisto First Presbyterian Church, where a girl named Julia Laguerre was buried in a family mausoleum in 1852. People reported hearing unearthly screams time and time again, but never investigating the cause of it. 15 years later, when they opened the door to the mausoleum to inter the next family member who had died, finding a corpse huddled in the corner next to the door, arms outstretched as if trying to find the exit. Well, my friends thought it would be funny the idea to shut the giant stone door, which was originally open, behind me and pick me up in the morning. The bastards left me here. I tried and tried, using all my strength, but I couldn't budge it, and had taken 4 people to put it in place. In the dark, I resigned myself to the night ahead of me. Now, I normally don't frighten easily, but sitting there in the relatively small space, surrounded by a looming pressure that I couldn't begin to explain, the darkness itself seemed to try to consume me. From all around, it felt like weight was pressing against my skin, making even breathing hard. I sat in the dark for what must have been hours. When I heard, then I heard the scratches. They were faint at first. I was sure it was my imagination. But soon they became more and more frantic as time passed. I huddled up in one of the corners farthest from the room and tried to cover my ears. But nothing could stop the growing cacophony. This all may have lasted for a few minutes, but each second was unbearable eternity. Then a loud scream echoed through the darkness. It was a wail of unrestrained pain and fear. The scratching stopped. For the first time I could distinctly make out the sound of a girl sobbing to herself, the pitiful gasping of one without a shred of hope left. I felt such a sorrow at the moment, such pain, that I think I forgot how to be afraid. In my heart, all her suffering seemed to resonate. Inexplicably, I found myself apologizing aloud for everything that had happened to her. Hell, a part of me wanted to reach out and feel for a body to hug. But I couldn't bring myself to do it for fear that I truly would find one. I don't know whether or not she heard me or was even aware of my presence. The sobbing continued, and I could again hear fingers against the stone slab that was the tomb door. I fell asleep at some point, which I felt was a merciful gift from the fates. I'm not sure how long I was out, but I was woken by a loud and powerful thud as the door slammed against the ground outside. I could tell from the light grey outside that daybreak was near, so I must have slept for at least a few hours. I stumbled outside and went to the small unlocked prayer house. I think previously it was a segregated mini-church, but regardless, I leaned against the door and waited nervously until my friends arrived. I approached them as they clustered around the fallen door. 2 of them were kneeling next to it with faces of shock. There were bloody streaks covering the interior of the door, some with light scratches from fingernails, many without. I think now that she must have shrieked when they broke away from her hands, but I can't be sure. At first, they looked to me and checked my hands, then nervously glanced at one another. I was rightfully pissed with them and told them every detail of what I remembered, wanting them to know what I'd been through. Finally, after I grudgingly got into the car and we started to head back, someone spoke up. My friend said to me, "We were afraid to say anything, but look at your face." I later found out that many times people had tried to permanently seal the entrance of the mausoleum, including enough heavy locks and chains that it would require heavy equipment to remove it, only to have it found torn open with the door lying on the ground once more. This was in the 1980s, the last attempt of many through the decades. It seemed like some force was ensuring that it was impossible to ever repeat the mistakes of the past. This is something I am understandably quite grateful for, but to this very day, I am chilled to the bone when I think of what happened that night. When I reached from the back seat and adjusted the rear view mirror, I saw that there was blood caked on my face, just like the streaks upon the stone slab. There were dark red lines on either side, as if someone had gently cradled my face with torn fingers as I slept that night, feeling the warmth of another for the first time in over 100 years. An egg. It was a car accident. Nothing particularly remarkable, but fatal nonetheless. You left behind a wife and 2 children. It was a painless death. The EMTs tried their best to save you, but to no avail. Your body was so utterly shattered, you were better off, trust me. And that's when you met me. What happened? You asked. Where am I? You died, I said, matter-of-factly. No point mincing words. There was a truck, and it was skidding. Yep, I said. I died? Yep. But I feel bad about it. Everyone dies, I said. You looked around. There was nothingness. Just you and me. What is this place? He asked. You asked. Is this the afterlife? More or less, I said. Are you God? You asked. Yep, I replied. I'm God. My kids, my wife, you said. What about them? Would they be all right? That's what I like to see, I said. You just died and your main concern is for your family. Oh, that's good stuff right there. You looked at me with fascination. To you, I didn't look like God. I just looked like some man, some vague authority figure. More of a grammar school teacher than the Almighty. Don't worry, I said. They'll be fine. Your kids will remember you as perfect in every way. They didn't have time to grow contempt for you. Your wife will cry on the outside, but will be secretly relieved. To be fair, your marriage was falling apart. Falling. If it's any consolation, she'll feel very guilty for her feeling relieved. Oh, you said. So, what happens now? Do I go to heaven or hell or something? Neither, I said. You'll be reincarnated. Ah, you said. So the Hindus are right. All the religions are right in their own way, I said. Walk with me. You followed along as we strode in the void. Where are we going? Nowhere in particular, I said. It's just nice to walk while we talk. So what's the point then? You asked. When I get reborn, I'll just be a blank slate, right? A baby? So all my experiences and everything I did in this life won't matter? Not so, I said. You have within all the knowledge and experience of all your past lives. You just don't remember them right now. I stopped walking and took you by the shoulders. Your soul is more magnificent, beautiful, and gigantic than you could possibly imagine. A human mind can only contain a tiny fraction of what you are. It's like sticking your finger into a glass of water to see if it's hot or cold. You put a tiny part of yourself into the vessel, and when you bring it back out, you've gained all the experiences it's had. You've been a human for the last 34 years, so you haven't stretched out yet and felt the rest of your immense consciousness. If we hung out here for longer, you'd start remembering everything. But there's no point doing that between each life. How many times have I been reincarnated then? Oh, lots and lots. And lots of different lives, I said. This time around, you'll be a Chinese peasant girl in 540 AD. What? You stammered. You're sending me back in time? Well, I guess technically. Time, as you know it, only exists in your universe. Things are different where I come from. Where do you come from? You pondered. Oh, sure, I explained. I come from somewhere else, and there are others like me. I know you want to know what it's like there, but you honestly won't understand. Oh, you said, a little let down. But wait, if I get reincarnated to other places in time, could I have interacted with myself at some point? Sure. Happens all the time. And with both lives only aware of their own time span, you don't even know it's happening. So what's the point of it all? Seriously? I asked. Seriously? You asking me for the meaning of life? Isn't that a little stereotypical? Well, it's a reasonable question. You persisted. I looked into your eye. The meaning of life, the reason I made this whole universe, is for you to mature. You mean mankind? You want us to mature? No, just you. I made this whole universe for you. With each new life you grow and mature and become a larger and greater intellect. Just me? What about everyone else? There is no one else, I said. In this universe, there's just you and me. You stared blankly at me. But all the people on Earth, all you. Different incarnations of you. Wait. I'm everyone? Now you're getting it, I said, with a congratulatory slap on the back. I'm every human who ever lived? Or who will ever live, yes. I'm Abraham Lincoln? And you're John Wilkes Booth too, I added. I'm Hitler? You said, appalled. And you're the millions he killed. I'm Jesus? And you're everyone who followed him. You fell silent. Every time you victimized someone, I said, you were victimizing yourself. Every act of kindness you've done to yourself. Every happy and sad moment ever experienced by any human was or will be experienced by you. Why? You asked me. Why do all this? Because someday you will become like me. Because that's what you are. You're one of my kind. You're my child. You said, incredulous. You mean I'm a god? No, not yet. You're a fetus. You're still growing. Once you've lived every human life throughout all time, you will have grown enough to be born. So the whole universe, you said, it's just an egg of sorts, I answered. Now it's time for you to move on to your next life. And with that, I sent you on your way. Sadie. Watch out for Sadie. What? Watch out for Sadie. She haunts the garage. I searched the face of Carol, the woman who had been training me for the past week, waiting to see her blink or twitch the corners of her mouth into a mocking smile. Instead, I received a deadpan stare. Apparently this was serious business. I don't believe in ghosts, I said. Say what you want, but don't let the doors shut on you. We had some nasty incidents in that area, and we don't fool around in there. she sighed. Oh, never mind. It looks like I'll have to come with you. I can't trust you to take this seriously. Somewhat nonplussed, I followed Carol down the hall to the garage. In reality, it was where the office supplies were stored, but it had been a garage once upon a time in the building's past, so the name stuck. Or so Carol told me. I had applied for the open sales position at the company about a month ago. Just around the time I had given up hope, the HR department had called me back saying that they wanted an interview. I knew nothing about the hair products that they wanted me to sell, but I was desperate for any occupation at that point. My first job out of college had been for a big-name grocery chain, making sure that certain items were coded correctly. But when the grocery store needed to make cuts, I was one of the first people to go. Carol had been extremely friendly to me from the start. The company was housed in an old building with the aforementioned garage attached. The staff was comprised mostly of women, most of them beautiful and stylish, with a handful of male employees. Unfortunately, except for Carol, many of the other employees seemed offended in some way by my casual appearance. In the past, I had never been the type of girl to worry about brushing my hair or putting on lipstick. I did make an effort for my new line of work, and I pulled my hair into a neat ponytail to appeal to my peers. However, my lack of face paint or glitzy ornamentation deterred most from approaching me. Carol, of course, being a free-spirited sort as well as my trainer, did everything she could to raise my spirit. She batted her sooty eyelashes and pursed her lips in dismay when I told her of my fears of being permanently ostracized. Don't you think about those silly girls for a minute. You're here for a reason, and you can go places. Well, she was confident about my potential anyway. But she didn't take any nonsense. As she marched down the long hall in her startlingly pointed stilettos, I couldn't help but notice that she was glancing back at me and tossing her head in a way that meant something that was irritating her. You don't have to come, I said. I don't want you to get hurt, Carol insisted. We arrived at the turn that would take us to the garage. At the end of a shorter hallway was a set of heavy steel doors. They swung inward, revealing rather ordinary, if not dreary-looking cement flooring and walls. On the other side of the room was the door that would have opened to let cars or trucks in, and it seemed to have been bolted down permanently. Shelves lined the walls, and I took a quick mental inventory of where things were stored should I need to come back later. Meanwhile, Carol kicked the doorstop underneath the door to keep it from closing. That's important, she said, giving me a stern look. The doors don't open from the inside, and there's no telling how long you would have to wait for someone to come and get you. As if that wasn't enough, the switch in here is faulty. Sometimes you can't even get the lights to turn back on. I nodded to prove that I was taking the ghost of Sadie and the task of closing the garage very seriously. So, has anyone seen this, Sadie? I asked. Immediately, Carol clapped her hand over my mouth. The smell of a fruity perfume, juicy couture, I found out later, enveloped me. You don't ever say her name in here, Carol snapped. After that, it was pretty routine. Carol showed me where the light switch was on the far wall. She flicked it down, and even with the door open on the other side, I felt a small tingle of fear creep up my spine. What if the door were to shut on us? What if everyone went home and we had to spend the entire night in that supply room in the dark? I still didn't believe in Sadie, but the fear of being trapped was palpable. During the last hour of the workday, the chance of anyone coming near the garage was slim. That was why we had someone come down to do a last-minute check to make sure the light was off. My co-workers were often careless and left the light on, so I thought at the time. It turns out that neglecting to turn off the lights was a conscious decision by many. My co-workers warmed to me when they realized that I wasn't afraid of going to the garage to turn off the light before it was time to head back home for the day. It became part of my nightly routine. Even though Carol rolled her eyes and told me to stop babying the other women, I saw no harm in taking it over, since everyone else was superstitious about the supposed entity that lived there. If I had been honest, I would have admitted to the others that I was noticing strange things about the garage. For the most part, I allowed myself to give natural explanation to every circumstance that spooked me. For instance, on more than one occasion, I would find myself forced to duck as things fell off the shelves above my head. I told my supervisor, who lectured my co-workers about putting supplies back in the orderly fashion, but they didn't seem keen on heeding her orders. I also noticed in the mornings, when I went to turn the light in the garage on, that sometimes I had to flick the switch up and down a few times. It was almost as if it didn't want to turn back on. A silly thought. One night, I was turning off the light switch in the garage when I heard a faint scraping noise. Looking over my shoulder, I saw that the door was sliding closed. I must not have secured the doorstop properly. Heart hammering, I darted to the other side of the room and threw my arm out to catch the door. I grunted as the thick steel shut on my arm, but was able to wedge the door back open. I slid through and happened to glance up as the door was closing. Something white darted back into the shadows, as if it had been trying to follow me, but didn't want to be seen. I wish that I had been more imaginative, but I was able to convince myself that there was a rat or something in the garage. I reported it to my supervisor, who called an exterminator, but they found no signs of vermin. This didn't bother me much. I'd always been the rational type. I was proud of my bravery. I was stupid. The incidents in the garage happened more frequently, and I finally allowed myself to think of Sadie. Maybe there was something to the superstition that my co-workers had. The garage was undoubtedly an unlucky place to be. Carol twisted her ankle that winter when she was fetching printer paper, and while that could be called and chalked up to Carol's dubious footwear choices, another woman named Monique was hit on the head by a falling carton of envelopes. She needed stitches. The sales department also seemed to have a high turnover rate. Every other week, we had someone leaving who needed to be replaced. These incidents worried me a little, but not enough to cause me any genuine fear. I was doing great at selling, and my supervisor was talking about cross-training me in other departments. Then, after the new hair had come and gone, I received proof of the warnings that Carol had given me when I was first hired. I was caught off guard, I'll admit, because my co-workers had taken over the task of closing the garage for 2 weeks while I trained in the accounting department. I didn't think about the doorstop much. I just kicked it idly as I walked in, not noticing how close to the edge of the door it was. I turned off the light and simultaneously heard a familiar scraping noise. I was too late to react this time. The door snapped shut behind me. My world became total darkness. I went to flick the light back on. Nothing. My mouth went dry, and I tried not to panic. Maybe someone would come by. I hadn't told anyone I was closing the garage, so it was likely that someone else would come down to take care of it. I only had to wait a few minutes. Something cold fluttered against the back of my legs. With a yelp, I jumped forward and banged into a shelf. A box crashed behind me. It sounded heavy. I had to be careful. If I hit my head and no one came by, I might not be found for hours. I tried to explain away the thing that had touched me. Rats. It had to be rats. The exterminators weren't looking in the right place when they investigated. I missed you. That voice whispering into my ear. How can I describe it? Carefully, as though it hadn't been used for ages, slightly muffled, as if the speaker were talking with a scarf around their face. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Who are you? Carol? This isn't funny. I stepped backward and squinted in vain, trying to see who it was there with me. No, it's Carol. My heart went into my throat, and I suddenly recalled what Carol had told me last year. She had mentioned all the nasty incidents that had happened in this garage. I never thought to ask about them. I couldn't breathe. Stop it, I whispered. Stop it right now. Come into the dark with me. Come into the damp and dark. It's nice. If Carol hadn't opened the garage door then, I'm not sure what would have happened to me. Suddenly, the blinding light of the hallway was pouring in. I recall abruptly being face to face with two dark holes set deep into taut and colourless skin, and a terrible, inhumanly wide grin inches from my nose. I also got the impression of long, stringy black hair. I had always thought ghosts were transparent, but this one seemed very solid. At that moment I had a horrible feeling that she wished to consume me. But Carol had the back of my shirt in her fist, and even as Sadie lunged, jaws snapping with a horrifying clacking noise, Carol dragged me out of that hellish place. She yanked the door shut behind us, and we collapsed, gasping, on the floor. My eyes were glued to the gap beneath the door, where pale fingers with the long and cracked nails were scrabbling madly for a few moments, and then retreated. Perhaps I was seeing things, but they looked as though they were fading, like smoke dispersing through the air. I quit the next day. I'm still looking for a new job, but I think it's essential to take my time. Carol and I meet occasionally for coffee. Neither of us liked to speak about that day. I'm not sure how much she saw, but we share a strange bond between us. I as the survivor and she as the rescuer. I contacted some of the other women who used to work for that company. Few wanted to speak to me about Sadie, but I did learn some important facts. Sadie has only gone after people who turned out the lights, and she has a unique attraction to those who know her name. I sleep with the lights on in my apartment now, and I don't go out at night. I know Sadie has been in that garage for a long time, but I can't help feeling that she wanted to follow me. Sometimes when I step out of a room, I imagine, or I think that I do, the sound of her scraping those long fingernails down the walls. Occasionally I find that the objects I placed on my kitchen table have fallen to the floor while my back was turned. I might just be psyching myself out. If Sadie did follow me home, why would she be taking so long to finish me off? Maybe she was just waiting for me to turn off the lights. Well, that's the end of this reading. To whoever will come by to listen to this, whatever this is, yeah, I will be streaming again soon, so yeah, feel free. Feel free to oh my god, I have to say this. Feel free to subscribe whenever you want. I don't know. I'll read again soon and do other things and post like speed paints and stuff like that. But anyway, yeah, that's all for now. See you later. Bye bye.